This is a cheesy man, but this is Cheddar Man. He was found in Cheddar Gorge in southwest Britain in 1903, but lived about 10,000 years ago, during a time period called the Mesolithic, where humans, at least in Western Europe, were living as hunter-gatherers still. He's probably the most famous ancient human to ever be found in Britain. However, when Cheddar Man was alive, the island of Britain didn't really exist. Britain was connected to the continent of Europe by this now lost landmass we call Doggerland. Doggerland was a world of meandering rivers and ancient trees. Pine, hazel, and oak lined the banks of streams and giant rivers. At this point in time, the Thames, the Rhine, the Seine, the Meuse, and the Scheldt all drained into what we call the Channel River, an enormous tidal waterway splitting Doggerland in half. It's incredible imagining famous landmarks like the White Cliffs of Dover, not being on the coastline as such, but being on the edge of this huge plain bordering this massive river. It's always great to imagine a natural feature so differently. Shows you how much time has passed. However, this was a world living on borrowed time. 10,000 years ago, when Cheddar Man called this area home, sea level was rising 70 centimeters every century. And in a couple of thousand years, Doggerland would sink beneath the waves. Still, thanks to modern archaeology, we can get a glimpse into these last few people that ever roamed Doggerland. What were they building and hunting? What art were they creating? How can modern science find where they live? And what happened at the very end of Doggerland? In 1931, the fishing vessel Kayleigh was fishing off the coast of Norfolk when they noticed a lump of peat had been brought up with their nets. The captain, a chap called Pilgrim Lockwood, fantastic name, smacked the lump and heard a ring. He thought he had hit a lump of metal, but what he actually found was this. Look at this thing. This is an absolute beast of a harpoon, 22 centimeters long, made of antler. It's an absolutely beautiful artifact. This was the first tangible piece of evidence that the North Sea had once been home to prehistoric people. There had been other clues before, sunken forests had been found, but this is the first time for sure we knew that humans lived there. Harpoons and barbed points have now become perhaps one of the most common artifacts found in Doggerland. Obviously, Doggerland was a wet place to be. It's full of giant rivers, it's surrounded by a rapidly rising sea, and no doubt these prehistoric people were taking full advantage of that. Probably these harpoons made something like this. This is a lister, I'm not sure how to say that, or a kind of three-pronged harpoon made by the Inuit. Perfect tool for catching slippery fish. Probably the Kayleigh harpoon was part of something like that. Many of these bone and antler points were also no doubt used as spear tips or arrowheads. Antler and bone was just one of the most versatile materials these prehistoric people had to hand. No doubt about it. The environment really must have been home to a lot of deer. This must have been a real deer bonanza for sure. Now, antler and deer bones were not the only material these people had to hand, though. What do you think these two harpoons or points were made out of? If you guessed human bones, you would be absolutely correct. Human bones. That was a surprise result of this study into these points from the Dutch side of Doggerland. Scientists were able to determine this thanks to a process called zoo archaeology mass spectrometry, or zoo-MS, I think it's called. This is a complicated process full of extremely big words.
Matrix-assisted laser desorption ionization time of flight mass spectrometer.
Bit of a mouthful, that. But basically, the collagen in our bodies, in all animal bodies, is kind of species specific. There are certain markers in it where you can tell which species it has come from. That allows scientists to identify who bones belong to in the archaeological record, of course. It's incredibly smart. I'm constantly blown away by how smart and just how many ways scientists can untangle our past. There's so many people so much smarter than me. It's so humbling. What can you say about human harpoons, human bone arrow points? I suppose back in those days you had to be resourceful. If you needed to go hunting and all you had was Uncle Flugfart's shin bone, then that's what you had, right? That's what you had. It also cannot be ruled out that there was some symbolic meaning to using human bones as a tool, as a weapon. There's definitely the potential for symbolism there, I think. I think that's not crazy. Who knows, though? Who knows? When we imagine life in the Mesolithic, I think we kind of picture sort of a purely natural world, untarnished by humans. And certainly the people of the Mesolithic don't live in a built environment like we do, but they did build. All humans build. This is Carr up in Yorkshire. Now it is some coastal farmland, but 10,000 years ago, this was a village at the northern edge of Doggerland, sitting quietly by the side of an ancient lake. It's probably the best preserved Mesolithic site in the whole of the UK, I would imagine. There's all sorts of crazy artifacts we're going to discuss from Carr. It's really an incredible place. But first, I want to take a look at this. This is the remains of a Mesolithic house. You can see archaeologists unearthed a series of concentric post holes, probably to make a house like this. Conical house. It seems it had a slightly sunken floor, about 20 centimeters or so deep, filled with dark sediment, which is probably the remains of like a grass floor, thick grass floor, reed floor, something like that. Some insulation. Insulation for prehistoric buttocks, guys. The people of the past, they got cold buttocks too. Not nice. These homes were truly hubs of activity. I think I'm right in saying that in the trench that unearthed this house, 8,000 stone artifacts were found, as well as 210 pieces of animal bone. At Carr, there was also a timber platform along the lake edge, probably to provide some sort of dry workspace, dry living space, perhaps some sort of dock, something like that. In all, I think archaeologists estimate this village to have spanned about 2 hectares, 5 acres. It's a lot. There were a lot of people here, seemingly living here for quite substantial periods of time. Almost semi-permanent settlement, it seems like. Obviously, building a settlement required tools, stone axes like this, flint stone axes, but that wasn't the only tools they had. They also used antler axes. This one from the Netherlands I love because it still has a tiny piece of the handle intact. This is another one I really like. This is another axe made out of the radius of a bison. Steppe bison. That's just the most prehistoric thing you can ever say. What's your axe made out of? Oh, bison. 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 My axe is bison. Incredible artifacts, man. Incredible artifacts. I was actually totally unaware that antler was strong enough to chop wood, but it absolutely is. Is stone better? Is metal better? Obviously. Of course it is. But these people don't have access to every resource at every possible time. They have a lot of antler, and so antler is what they make axes out of. Fascinating stuff. Speaking of being resourceful, check this artifact out. This is absolutely incredible. This is a boar's tooth inserted into a piece of antler, presumably to make a chisel, perhaps? Some sort of chisel, finer woodworking, something like that. That's just the epitome of resourcefulness. I had never thought for a moment how to make a chisel in the Stone Age. Boar's teeth inserted into antler. Fantastic. Now, all of this chopping and bashing, that's just one side of human technology, right? We also have finer crafts. Archaeologists in the Netherlands have found plenty of bone needles, stitched together all the skins that no doubt came from these hunts. Perhaps also formed the walls of these houses. That's entirely possible too. And then as well, you have to think of all the fibers that go into making these constructions too. The fibers that come along with the needles, the clothes, the arrows. These villages would have been a hub of activity, absolute hub of activity. If you went back in time, you would find these settlements, home to people completely familiar with the natural resources of their environment. So much more capable of just surviving on their own wits and with their own hands than we are now. Putting everything to use. It makes me feel so wasteful in our current time. It makes me feel so wasteful. We are obviously super lucky to have found Carr. It's a fantastic site. But how can we find more of these places, right? How can we find more? How can we find villages that have sunk beneath the waves? So there's been a really huge effort in the past 10 years, 20 years to map Doggerland, to really try and understand this lost world. One huge player in this, maybe the biggest player, is this team Europe's Lost Frontiers at Bradford University. But they had a lot of European partners too. Basically, they're using seismic data. The same info I think we use to hunt for oil and gas, things like that, to understand areas of interest, to understand the topography. One giant area of interest would be this area just south of Dogger Bank. It's called Outer Silver Pit Lake, so called because fishermen discovered that there was a lot of silver sole that lived down there. Obviously now it's a deep region of the North Sea known for its fish, but 10,000 years ago when Cheddar Man was alive, this was probably a giant lake on Doggerland, home to all sorts of animals and 100% humans too. Prehistoric people really valued a lakeside spot. There's game, there's fish, there's fresh water. There's no way humans weren't living there. Another area of interest would have been here, the Elbe Paleo Valley. Basically a big continuation of the River Elbe into Doggerland. No doubt a huge wetland. Of course, you had the Channel River, where all those rivers came together. No doubt humans were living along there. You can really see some cool details here, like if I zoom in. You can kind of see here the remains of like an ancient river channel with the delta there. A team of scientists went to this region of Doggerland, led by Vincent Gaffney. He's published a lot on Doggerland, one of the main guys looking into it for sure. They went out to investigate this area on an 11-day voyage. They called this the Southern River because it's heading south. Good name. In some of the core samples they took, they actually managed to find stone artifacts, flint artifacts. Let me pull one up right here. Is it going to load? This is one of the fragments, probably some sort of hammerstone, something like that, found in that expedition into that southern river. That's incredible, man. That's incredible. That's so crazy, really, that we can use all this technology, like the technology we're using for oil and gas exploration, all of this stuff, apply it to archaeology, find interesting areas, promising areas for research, get some cores, get a boat out there, get some cores, and bang. Human-made artifacts come up. It's incredible, man. It's incredible. We're going to learn a lot more about Doggerland. As long as the money's there, as long as we keep researching, it's really down there, still waiting to be discovered. Something that is harder to untangle than the whereabouts of Mesolithic villages, probably harder to untangle, is the beliefs of the people who lived in them. I think it's fair to say with Doggerland we found thousands and thousands of points and stuff like that, but little art, very little art. One of the few engraved bones that was super cool, this one here, bison metatarsal covered in zigzag markings. What's interesting is that it's very similar to this jawbone here. This is a horse's jawbone found in Kendrick's Cave in Llandudno, Wales. It's about 10,000 years old, same age as Cheddar Man. Now, this is on the opposite side of Britain to Doggerland, but I do find it interesting. It's that same zigzag pattern. Probably it's so simple a pattern that you can find examples of this from almost any time, but it is interesting. Once again, Star Carr, though, is kind of the place to look for this stuff. So in 2015, archaeologists led by Nicky Milner found this. It's called the Star Carr pendant. It's engraved on a small, smooth piece of shale, and it's covered in all these lines, and they've drilled a hole for the string. Who knows what it means? Maybe nothing. It's almost map-like in a way, but I doubt it is that. Who knows though, who knows? The most enigmatic artifacts from Star Carr though are for sure these. These are the skull caps of red deer. I think as of 2016, 24 have been found at Star Carr, and many of them drilled through the top of the skull. Just like this, presumably so you can strap it on. Something like that. That's very cool. There's been a big debate as to whether these skull caps are a hunting aid or perhaps the clothes, the costume, the garb of a shaman. Debate at the minute seems to be swinging towards shaman, which I know is a cliche. I know, archaeologists are always picking ritual. But basically, it's because we don't have great examples ethnographically of people dressing as deer to go hunting. There are some notable examples of North America of Native Americans dressing as bison and wolves to help facilitate these bison jumps, these buffalo jumps, where the herds would be driven off the edge of the cliff. It's got to be, what a spectacle. What an absolute spectacle that must have been. But in Europe and in Asia, ethnographically, I don't know that we have great examples of people dressing as deer to go hunting, but we do have plenty of examples of people, shamans from all around the world, really, kind of embodying animals. One of the most well-documented comes from the Evenki people in North Asia, modern Russia. The word shaman even comes from their language. I did not know that. Very cool. Traditionally, the Evenki are hunters and reindeer herders, and naturally, the religion and the worldview of these people reflects that environment. There's actually this amazing 3D video I found of an Evenki Elder telling a folk story made by the Pitt Rivers Museum. When was the last time you were told a folk story by a reindeer herder? Probably never. One of the crazy things on YouTube, some of these extremely valuable videos have so few views. Only 500 people have seen it. Go give it a watch. It's such a unique piece of footage. Crucially for my video now, though, on Doggerland, Evenki shaman would dress as deer, dress as animals to communicate with the other world, to ask spirits in the other world to release animals for the hunt. They would also try and placate animals that had been hunted so that the hunter's family wasn't cursed in any way. This negotiation with animal spirits is very well documented in hunter-gatherer communities, as far as I'm aware. I think a lot of them have this sort of, bargaining with nature, negotiation, this dealing with the spirit world in order to ensure their success. I do think the sheer number of these skullcaps found at Carr probably suggests we might be dealing with the residence of a shaman, the house of a shaman, or perhaps of a shamanic site. It's really unusual. I mean, it's a very well-preserved site, so who knows what we would find if other sites were more well-preserved. But still, it seems quite unique. Seems like there's something interesting going on at Carr. There is actually a site in Germany from this Mesolithic period where I think archaeologists have made a pretty good case that this is the burial of a shaman. But History with Kayleigh, great YouTuber, is covering that.
She also had some very fascinating things that were kind of wrong or not healthy about her body, like her upper vertebrae. There was an issue with that, as well as the hole in the skull with her. It was malformed. So now it is thought that if she held her head in a certain way, that she may have been able to cut off blood vessels to her brain, which caused her to possibly hallucinate.
Kayleigh's made a great video on the shamanic burial. Do go check it out. There's a link down below. It's a cheeky collaborino. Kayleigh is also Dutch, so had to be in a Doggerland video. I'm pretty sure the Dutch will have brought back Doggerland in the next 200 years, dike by dike. But Carr, Doggerland, these really seem to be the place where the spirits of the deer roamed. There was really something going on there with that. By 8,500 years ago, sea levels had risen enough that Britain was no longer attached to mainland Europe. That's probably the most significant natural event in the history of our island, probably. Becoming an island, at least in human history. But Doggerland had not entirely sunk yet. In the middle of the North Sea was now Dogger Island, over the area we call Dogger Bank. At its shallowest point, Dogger Bank is still only 13 meters below the waves. I did not appreciate that. I thought the North Sea, areas of the North Sea would be way deeper. Dogger Bank itself is about 260 kilometers by 100 kilometers to give us an idea of how big that island might have been. It's quite large. Definitely large enough for people to carry on living there quite happily, even once the sea had turned it into an island. If anyone did remain though, they might have had a pretty bad time. So check this out. This is the cross-section of Earth from Meryton on Scotland's west coast. Hope I said that correctly. This great layer here was deposited by one of the biggest tsunamis in the last 11,000 years. It's called the Stoggerland Slide. You can see evidence of it all along Scotland's east coast. Really clear example of it here in Shetland as well. Check this out. Sometime around 8,150 years ago, an enormous piece of underwater continental shelf broke away, slipped off. It happened somewhere around here. This is the Stoggerland in Norwegian, or Great Edge. It seems that perhaps 290 kilometers of shoreline slipped into the ocean. Huge, huge landslide. Scientists had wondered for a long time if this tsunami was the nail in the coffin for Doggerland. It seems not. It seems that Dogger Island did survive it, at least for a little bit longer. This is what core samples by that Europe's Lost Frontier found. But how did this tsunami affect communities up and down Britain and on Dogger Island? Hard to say, hard to say. I think you're going to notice a tsunami though. And if your community was really coastal, you might have been a hard time, particularly if you're on the northern edge of Dogger Island. You might have been in for a really hard time. By 7,000 years ago, based on our current understanding, it seems that Doggerland had sank beneath the waves. I've really been wondering, was the sea level rise around Doggerland perceptible? 70 centimeters every century? I think you might notice that over the course of your lifetime. You're going to notice that there were areas of your childhood, areas that you roamed as a child that are now underwater, that your parents once hunted on, which are now underwater. You're sort of recognizing this fact, perhaps, and now there's a giant tsunami. It makes you wonder what they thought of all of this. What did they think was happening to the world around them? It really makes me wonder, did any of them remember Doggerland? Was there any cultural memory of this land that had once been there, just a few centuries before? Did they tell tales of their ancestors hunting where the sea once was? Were they aware of the change that happened to them? And if so, when was the last time that this story of Doggerland was told?